Thanks. Thanks, guys. Thanks, Werner, for the lovely intro. Thanks to Twisted Bytes and Lemonade for hosting this great conference, so thumbs up. It's really a pleasure and honor for me to talk to you guys. And the topic is going to be SilverStripe and Vue.js, a love story. Or more specific, how we manage the payload injection process in our hybrid front-end approach. I will talk about what that means in a couple of minutes. Just a few words about us. My company is Level 51. We are a small software studio, super small. We are 2.5 developers because we have an intern at the moment. And we are SilverStripers since 2009, the ancient times of 2.3. And yeah, what do we do? Mainly product development for other startups in early stages. And our tools of choice are, of course, SilverStripe, Vue.js, Node.js, and Ionic. All right. I thought how to approach the topic, SilverStripe in combination with Vue.js, and I'm not doing just a Vue.js tutorial because you can do this on yourself on the Vue.js page. I decided to go for a little case study. So we had a big project this year that we realized with SilverStripe and Vue.js, and I'm just going to be talking about which decisions we made during the whole requirements engineering phase, about the realization, what problems we encountered, how we solved them, stuff like that. But before we jump to the project, I want to do a little Vue.js head start for all the guys who never touched it. Who has ever worked with Vue.js so far? Some. Okay, all right. I'm not digging into if it is better or worse than React or Angular because we would need another day. So just some GitHub facts. They're saying it's a progressive, incrementally adoptable JavaScript framework for building UI on the web. And version 2.5.17, nearly 230 releases, 2,500 commits, nearly 200 contributors, and a decent amount of stars and forks. So this is always good to see if a project is popular or trending, and it's really pretty active, the whole project, although it's still very closely tied to one person, to Evan View, the creator of Vue.js. And now we have some trivia. Since yesterday evening, I think we are trivia fans and some trivia pros. Vue.js was developed as a rapid prototyping tool by Evan View when he was working at the Google Creative Labs. I very much like it because it's super flexible and very unopinionated. So you can have it just as a small library in your website to add some JavaScript, reactive magic, or you can have it as a full stack for SPA development with routing, an own Flux or Redux implementation, stuff like that. So it's really up to you. Plus, it's super easy to get started because there's a very flat learning curve at the beginning, even for let's say, jQuery guys. If they still are any. It implements the reactive data binding pattern. I will do a little demo later on, and is approximately as fast as React when it comes to rendering. There is a benchmark with a list rendering example on their website, so if you're interested in performance benchmarking, you should have a look. And what's also cool, 0 production dependencies. So you can really just add one script to your HTML, and Vue.js is available immediately. So this is very cool. So if you don't have a lot of tooling around it, which would have been dev dependencies anyway, it doesn't add a lot of footprint to your overall resources. And what's kind of handy as well, it can very well be used alongside other libraries and frameworks. Let's say you have a legacy system to maintain, the whole thing is jQuery, you don't want to touch that, but you have to add a new feature. It isn't definitely an anti-pattern to also add Vue.js and just create the new feature with the new technology, because, as I said, it doesn't add much footprint, so it would be kind of fine to do. Some of the patterns and features that come with Vue.js is the model view view model pattern, a virtual DOM, pretty good virtual DOM, a fork of Snap DOM actually. It has, of course, components, especially in the version 2 of Vue.js. Components are like the main building block. directives, filters, stuff like that, that all Angular developers know are still available, but they are not really officially sunsetted, but the focus is on components, which is absolutely fine. Of course, there's stuff like computed properties, lifecycle hooks. So this is basically the stuff that was stolen from React. And we have, as I said, routing, a data store implementation, which is really great. I really like that. It's called Vuex. And you also can do server-side rendering and stuff like that, but that's really advanced stuff, and I won't go too deep on that. When I first worked with Vue.js, I got the opinion that it's like, talking about the version 2, that's like a best-of of the existing and competing frameworks. So it has aspects of Angular, Angular 2, of React, and of old stuff like Knockout.js. And I got the impression that it's really a combination of everything that is good of the other frameworks, but you know, it's always up to the scenario you want to do and up to the developing skills. Right. Just to show you a minimal Vue.js instance. So you see, you don't need a lot of code. Minimal configuration. You can create a new Vue instance, and you just have two mandatory properties, and that's the element. That's the element the instance is bound to, and where it lives in. And you have your initial data. This data is already reactive. If you wire it in your HTML, you can see the snippet here. You're referencing the app or the div with the app ID, and everything inside is already like managed by Vue. So this syntax, I think, okay, I don't have to explain that probably, and then you're already good to go. That's basically the basic principle of the MVVM implementation. So you have your data, you have your Vue instance, and then your template. And it's not two-way data binding like it was with the Angular 1 world, where you have those messy situations where you don't know what influences this, and can I really change this property, or does it start a chain of mutations? So we have a one-way data flow, like it was introduced, I think, with React pretty much, that the data flow paradigm. And it's working pretty well for Vue.js as well. If you look at a whole Vue.js application, I'd say it's a composition or orchestration of components. So this is also what might be very familiar for React developers. You can have like higher order components with a clear hierarchy of descendant and child components. And the whole public APIs and how components can interact is also pretty similar to React, because you have properties that a component can inherit from the parent level, and it can emit events back to the parent. Every component has its own private isolated state that cannot be accessed from the outside world. And if you want to like break out of this paradigm, you can still use the Vuex data store implementation, because then every component that is hooked to the data store can use setters and getters. And this is like, you know, that event bus. It communicates all the changes to the components that are linked to a special event or a special data property. And then you have like one top level. The data store is above the highest component for the whole data flow. Vue.js with superpowers. We heard a lot of superheroes already today, and the single file components, those are my superheroes when it comes to Vue.js. It's just a small snippet. It's basically just one file that contains the template, the logic, and the style for one discrete component. It has 3 root tags: template tag, script tag, and a style tag. And what I really like about the style tag is you can scope it. If you have the scope attribute, then you even can define like a style for paragraph tags, and it just will be applied for that specific component. You can have other interpreters like less or SCSS. Same is valid for the script tag. You can use TypeScript. And for the HTML part, you can have other forms than plain HTML like Jade or similar stuff. So it's really up to the flavors of the developer how to manage it. So this is what I really like about it. There's a whole ecosystem when it comes to tooling about Vue.js, and it's still growing. There's a really good CLI. I will show that in a minute for project scaffolding and some extra development tools, test setup, and so on. There are, of course, a lot of integrations for IDEs, for pretty much all of them, for the whole IntelliJ stuff, for Sublime, for Atom, Visual Studio Code. And there's one Chrome extension that is around for quite a long time now, still under active development, and it's super handy for development because you have that own View tab in the Chrome extensions console, and then you can see all the events that was fired by Vuex or that have been emitted. You can see your whole tree of components. You can even alter the contents. This is what I'm going to be showing you guys right now. So if you want to get started, it's really just a few lines of code. And this is what I will do, a super short demo before I jump to the case study. So what I do first, I already have the CLI installed, of course. So I'm doing Vue init simple, Vue demo 1. Simple is the template that I want to use for that one. Downloading template. Name, yeah, that's all fine. And we are already there. As you can see, it's just one file created. It's just an HTML file. If I run it, the browser, okay, that's not super fancy, of course, but I have the Vue tab here. You can see that's my root. That's the root data. And I can change it here to show you the first or the reactive data binding functionality. Welcome to StripeCon. If I look at the file, oh sorry, wrong CLI. So here we are. That's, as you see, regular HTML file. This is all our Vue.js logic. That's already it. You just have to drop this one dependency here. That's Vue from some CDN unpackaged. And at the end, it's really just those 10, 15 lines of code. So that is what I liked when I first tried it out. So you can jump in and play around immediately without setting up a whole tool chain around it and building routines, stuff like that. If you want to do fancy stuff, you're very welcome to, because there's another demo. You can do view list, I think was the command, to output all the templates. And the most featured one is Webpack. So you can see Vue init Webpack, Vue demo 2. And then it will ask me what I want to have. Project name, author, the build, if I want runtime and composer or runtime only. If I want the router, I say no. If I want to have ESLint, I say yes. If I want to have a ESLint preset like standard or Airbnb or none, I go for Airbnb because we learned it's good to be compliant with some conventions. And I could even set up unit tests, but I'm not doing that now. Use npm or yarn. Let's go for yarn. Then we're good to go. Now we could go in the Vue demo 2 directory and say npm run dev. Not found, probably because I don't have yarn. Sorry. Okay. But as you've seen, it's kind of easy to get started. Just create one of the templates, look at the auto-generated files. They're already like boilerplate tutorials. Some best practices are in there. It's always good just to check out where to get started with that. Okay, so much for the small head start. What about SilverStripe and Vue.js? As I said, I want to share some insights which we had during a project, and I'm going to be doing my case study on a social media content platform that we did for FIFA, the World Cup this year. I can't show you too much because I signed a pretty pretty hard NDA, but some things I am allowed to disclose. So this was our very lovely team, including myself. We've been in Moscow at the International Broadcast Center for 2 weeks. And yes, I was IT. I was really the only techie in the team. The rest, all content authors. And well, it was, again, nice to see that the whole team worked with SilverStripe and everything went fine. Let's start with the requirements. I'll just walk you through what the customer asked, and then our derived decisions and what we learned on the way. So there are two major requirements. They wanted a web interface for the content team, which you've just seen, and they wanted a web interface for the MRLs, which means media rights licensees, that are basically the journalists that use the front end of the whole application. So for the content team, they wanted to have a form for creating content snippets of the types video, image, and infographic. It's basically the content they had on the social media platform. They wanted to have a preview and streaming functionality, plus a download functionality for all the snippets. They wanted to have user roles, and they used the terms admin and content author, which came in pretty handy if you're familiar with SilverStripe. We wanted to have permission and publishing process management, and they wanted extended reporting on download and access stats. On the front-end side, for the media rights licensees, they wanted to have a very lean UI, which a rich presentation of their very valuable content. They wanted to have multiple filter options so that I can filter by type or by category or by team, whatsoever. They wanted to have a basic search functionality, and a major requirement was that it's available all around the globe, because we just had around 120 front-end users, but those were journalists from every country in the world, because Soccer World Cup is kind of a very popular sports event. So this was a very, very early mock-up of the whole platform, just to give you an impression. So the cards in the Masonic grid, those are the postings. And as you can see, all of them, they have an image, a title. You already can see the download call to action, link categories, stuff like that. At the left-hand side, there's a sidebar just for the whole filtering process. So as you can see, very lean. But there was still a lot of things to really take care about. So our challenge management was the following. We still did it with SilverStripe version 3.6.5, but we needed asset abstraction. We know there will be a lot of videos they will upload and a lot of images, tons of gigabytes, even terabytes. We weren't sure, so we said asset abstraction would be a good thing. But as we know, we only have that in the 4 version, so this was definitely a challenge. We wanted to have a clean and normalized database structure. Plus, we wanted well, to shrink the number of database queries we have to work on for the front end. Yeah, well, just to limit that to the minimum. We wanted good front-end data scaffolding on the initial request. This is kind of where our hybrid front-end approach lives. I'll talk about that in a couple of minutes. We wanted to have a fast API, and yes, now the hybrid front-end approach. We decided not to go for a full SPA because we had some pages and the whole login stuff. We wanted that to be like SilverStripe built in, because we had static pages like terms and conditions, data privacy, FAQs. That was just static stuff that we had the content authors hack in via the CMS module. And the whole login was fine to use the built-in stuff anyway. But the main view, I just showed you the mock-up, this should feel SPA-ish. So we decided to go for that hybrid approach. And the basic challenge was how to let JavaScript take over while you're using the template engine. And this is what I'll be focusing on in the next slides. Our decisions, we wanted image delivery via Cloudinary. We wanted video delivery via S3 sockets, and pseudo streaming via byte range requests. We did the whole web app hosting over Rackspace Cloud on the London node. We, of course, went for the SilverStripe admin UI for the whole content author team. We needed to customize the grid field a little bit, and we customized modules for uploaders for Cloudinary and AWS S3. There were a couple of Cloudinary modules. I think the most popular one is from Mate. But we needed like an upload field like you know it, but it never should land on our server. It should upload directly to Cloudinary. And same for S3. So this is like how we hacked our way to the asset abstraction. And we used the hybrid session module to have the load balancer without the sticky cookie flag. And this worked actually pretty well. On the front end, we decided to go for Vue.js, and we had this SPA only for a main view. So this is really where the hybrid approach lives. We had a Masonry grid for the content snippets. We referred to them as postings. And we wanted to deliver most of the most recent data, the most recent postings on the initial request, and we call that our payload injection. All subsequent requests after the initial SPA loading should be done in RESTful manner, and there were some requirements when it came to filtering and polling for updates, stuff like that. All right, basically, a lot of stuff is kind of straightforward, but what we wanted was like a pseudo hydration of our front end, and we wanted just a convenient way to prepare the posting payload for Vue.js on the initial main view request. Of course, we looked into server-side rendering and the universal app approach, but that would have been a little over-engineered for our situation. So we thought, let's go for the pseudo hydration concept. The whole payload injection flow is basically 4 steps. So our normalized data lived in our classical relational database. Then we developed a fetch interface that's basically the bridge between the raw data in the database and the whole SilverStripe class concept. Then we wanted the JSON to DOM injection, and then, of course, the pickup, the takeover by Vue.js. So those were the main steps where to go. The posting was, of course, a classical data object, the central data object with several relations to a Cloudinary image, S3 file, to the categories, to the teams. So as I said, we were aiming for a very clean and normalized data model. But on the one hand side, this is probably what you always want if you're designing big data models. On the other hand, on the front end, you're using more document formats. So you want to have all the data for one model in one place and not distributed over, I don't know, 5 or 7 columns or objects. Plus, we don't want it to have a ton of DB operations just for requesting one data object. So this was the desired document format we needed for the front end. And this was kind of the starting point where we started to develop that whole injection flow. So the fetch interface, it was just a static method, and the interface was just allowing those options for requesting. It always returned an array of documents in the format I just showed you, and we did a lot of validation around that. We had our fetch exception just to be really sure that everything is fine, and this one we really had tested very well, and for us this was good to have that logic outside of a controller, so it was very test friendly. Injecting the payload, this is, I'd say, the core of the whole process. We grabbed the filter options from the request, and then we had this helper class called Payload Injector, and we staged what we want to have in the front end. So this is similar if you say in a controller this customize and then render with, but we don't want to make it available for the template engine in a classical way, how we used to do it in static web development. We want to head it in one field that is called payload, and that should be JSON encoded. So, and this already gave us a good development convenience because we could execute that payload injector stage method in the whole request flow wherever we want, and be sure that only the payload field is inflated with the data we stage at that moment. Basically, it's a wrapper around controller current customized payload and then push it in JSON encoded. The helper class itself does not only wrap it, but just makes sure that you don't override the data you already staged, but merges it. That's what it really does. It collects array data throughout the whole request processing. It normalizes data and converts it to JSON, does stuff like numerical checks, a little cleanup of the whole JSON syntax, and in the end, it still hands it to renderable data. This still feels a little hackish, I know, but it worked kind of well for us. In the next version, because we are now using this for a lot of projects, we will have the payload injector do this kind of work for us. We're just injecting the whole JSON payload to one global attribute called payload. This is how we did it for that project. At the moment, we are encapsulating this so that it's not available in the root of your front-end application. But this is like how we hooked it to the front end. And here you can see how we made it like available for Vue.js. So the first lines is just getting Vue.js imported, preparing some data that you probably just use for the front end, like some Boolean flags. And this is where we merged in the payload we assigned to window payload in the data that is being used by Vue. And here we are like use it to create the new Vue instance. And at that moment, the whole payload we injected from the backend is available to the front end. So we just had to do this once, so it really was a win for the whole developer convenience. So it wasn't pretty hard to just add some more backend content that you need to be controlled by Vue.js, because we already defined the whole process, and thanks to the helper classes we created for that, it was pretty handy, and well, the whole team could adopt it pretty easily. So since everything that is on the root of data in a Vue.js instance is available without a prefix, we've been able to just loop around the root property called postings in a for loop. And since we defined the document format that is created by the fetch interface, we knew how those documents will look like. So inside this loop, we had access to the whole data of posting, like the title, the image, the asset, like the video, stuff like that. All subsequent requests happened in, as I said, RESTful manner, but we used the fetch interface again for that. And well, it wasn't much of a pain then, because the root postings property was already available for Vue.js, so we just kept updating that one property, and the whole reactive bindings managed the whole rendering for us. And this was kind of handy, because then we always checked, okay, we were looking at the result set, and then we were like, okay, are all the categories really available? Can I filter by video, or are there at least any videos in the result set? To never have the client in a situation where it creates a filter situation that returns 0 results. It's always a little bit frustrating, so we used that to overcome that. For the request, we used Axios, and well, that's basically all we did. One method, it was also called fetch. We defined that filter options interface already also on the client side, and when we did those subsequent requests, here this is the line that just updates the current postings, the initially injected ones, with the updated ones, and the rest, the whole rendering, was done by our Vue.js components. So as you see, it's not that much syntax, but it did the trick for us. For the whole RESTful logic, we had a small extensions to the find action method of request handler, just that we can say if it determines if the action is available or allowed on the controller. We wanted also to handle the HTTP methods. So that you can call the same endpoint with get and post. I know a lot of that logic is in RESTful server, but we just needed that small snippet, and that was perfectly doable with the trait. All right, at the moment we're working like on version 2, which is going to be the first really stable version and public version, because at the end of that process we plan to publish it. And there's still 2 things we want to incorporate before we go public with that. First thing is hybrid rendering. That is a pattern proposed at Google I/O this year. And at its core, it's just a check if a crawler is requesting or if it's a user request, and deliver optimized resources. And our idea just was to use the staged data that we have staged over the payload injector and provide 2 types of templates. If we notice that it's a crawler who is requesting, then we just use the same template that is specified, but if available, with a static suffix. And this is then, again, not a JavaScript control page, but a static rendered page, so that the crawler sees the pre-rendered version. It's good for indexing, it's better for discovery of the search engines, but on the other hand side, if a real user is accessing your site, you still have your JavaScript version. That is basically the flow. You have your find action method. Then we want to determine, is it a crawler or not? There is a concept proposed by Google how to do that at the moment in their hybrid rendering approach. And based on that result, we're deciding which template to use, and we're rendering that. So it's really no magic in that, but it's kind of valuable if you want that whole stuff indexed. Second thing is CQRS. Anybody ever applied command query responsibility segregation? Who has ever heard of it? One? Oh, it's one more than last time I asked this question. Basically, it's just defines different models of flows for creating and reading data. So at its core, it's just the principle of having a write database and a read database. And we wanted to have our conventional relational DB as write database, say a MariaDB or MySQL, and another store for those prepared documents I've just showed you, like our posting document. Let's store it in a Redis or MongoDB or Elastic, and this would be the read database. And we felt it's kind of a little step into the whole headless CMS world. We can't wait to try this with SilverStripe 4 and GraphQL, of course. Process is as follows. If you save a data object, it writes to your relational database, and then we hook into the owner of the write. There is our store handler who says commit. It takes all the data of the payload manifest. I'm going to be commenting on this in a minute. And then it writes it to the second payload store, the read database. And those are the 3 handlers we already created. There's an interface how to create a handler. And we want to have 3 or 4 for the first version. So there's an extension you can apply to data objects later, and we applied it to posting. So it's CQRS extension. Your key field is ID. That's always the key, like when you use it with Redis, it would have been the ID of the posting. Then we define the store and some config for the store, like which database to use or which collection, stuff like that. And the payload manifest, we did this by utilizing the config API. There's just one more private static property in your data object classes. We call it read payload. And then you can define what you want to have. In this case, ID and title, just database fields that are mandatory. Category is mapped to a mandatory function called getCategoryLabel. So it's mandatory that this returns a non-falsy value. And then we wanted to have a field called tags. It isn't mandatory, but it is mapped to another method. So this was kind of the approach. We wanted just to say, okay, config over code. Let's have those payload manifests for our data objects and let the store handlers and converters do the whole CQRS magic and storing it to another database. This is the payload store interface, just a couple of methods you have to implement to get it wired in the whole CQRS extension. And at the moment for phase 2, because we are doing the same project next year for the Women's World Cup and for the Rugby World Cup in Japan. And we already started on an Elastic integration to enhance the search, and it's actually working pretty well so far. All right, one last thing or two things. I've collected some resources for you guys. I'll be uploading the slides right after my talk. And if somebody is already using SilverStripe 4 and wants to use this or the whole Vue.js stuff with GraphQL, there's a really good module, Vue Apollo. Apollo is, I think, the leading GraphQL client. It's very good maintained, and the Reactive repository. I just tested it once in the sandbox, but it was super easy, so I'll vote for that. And that's all. Thanks a lot.